Hey, well, welcome to the inaugural Professional Development Webinar for Emerging Scholars. We're delighted that you've joined us today. My name is Jessie Rudy, and I co-chair the Emerging Scholars Committee.
Of our science. This sort of webinar, I think, is crucial for priming the next generation of researchers. And I think so much can be gained when we actually talk to each other, which is what this is all about. Jessie Rudy has done an amazing job of pulling this together. Thanks so much, Jessie. And thanks to all of you, the many participants joining in. I understand we have over 30, going on 40. And for all the great questions that you offered in advance. And then one final point, just to echo what Jessie said, given we are about the science, be sure to fill out the post-webinar survey.
Great. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
So today we'll be discussing how emerging scholars can maximize their chances for funding success. And I want to reiterate that this webinar was built upon the questions that were submitted prior to the webinar from registrants. So we'll specifically be focusing more on procedural tips and tricks from our esteemed panelists. And so we're thrilled to have Dr. Bill Elwood, Dr. Valerie Mahomes, and Dr. Arya Crump with us to share their knowledge, wisdom, and expertise. A very sincere thank you to each of you for taking the time to be with us today. Each panelist will speak for about 15 minutes or so, and then that will be followed by a general question and answer session. Many of you already submitted questions when you registered for the webinar, so thank you very much in advance for submitting those. But if others arise during the webinar, feel free to enter them into the questions box that you see on your screen. And so, Bill, can you try speaking to make sure everything's connected?
Why, hello, everyone.
Hi, Bill. Wonderful. It's working. Great. Well, you're up, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, and then you can take over.
Okay. Thanks so much, Jessie.
All right. Sure. So our first panelist is Dr. Bill Elwood. Dr. Elwood received his PhD in Human Communication from Purdue, and he joins us from the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research. He's the coordinator for the NIH Basic Behavioral and Social Science Opportunity Network, or OPNET. Prior to his current position, Dr. Elwood worked at the Center for Scientific Review, where he was the Scientific Review Officer for the Community-Level Health Promotion Study section. So thanks again for being with us today, Bill, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Jessie. I'm sorry if I missed this. Am I able to forward the slides, or do you need to do that?
I will forward them for you.
Okay. Let's go ahead then, shall we? Sure. Because as one thing Jessie didn't tell you is that I was a researcher and evaluator in the private sector for about 15 years before I came to work in government. And the sad but honest truth is there aren't that many tricks and tips to grantspersonship. There's just a lot of passion and hard work, and of course ideas. So what you see here is the motto, the moniker that appears on the main page of the National Institutes of Health. We are the nation's medical research agency. That link you see there that ends in ICD is a list of all the components that comprise the National Institutes of Health. 24 institutes and centers that manage research and training grants and contracts, and some support organizations, including the many components of the NIH Director's Office that coordinate programs on behalf of all of the agency. And that's where I work. As you can see from many of the photos, NIH is organized to a great extent by either diseases or somatically on specific life course events and or parts of the body. For example, the National Eye Institute, the National Institute on Neurological Disorders and Stroke, and of course the institutes that Drs. Crump and Mahomes represent as well. Substance, drug abuse, and child health and human development. You can see some others represented there as well. We are the nation's medical research agency. We are interested in improving health well-being, and not just for all Americans, but also to benefit the humans globally, and our research also includes model animals. Would you go ahead, please? True. Here are here's an almost exhaustive list of what we call mechanisms, the different kinds of grants you can get to start your career. The ones that are printed in blue, that appear in blue, are the ones that are more likely for younger investigators. Following in order in the left column, there are small grants, R03. They're called small because they are short projects, 2 years, and they are smaller in budget. These are really great if you are doing secondary data analysis. That often can happen when you are in an institution and collaborating with researchers with long histories who have data sets that have yet to be explored fully. There are, of course, individual fellowships, which you can see at the bottom of the first column. They range from pre-doctoral fellowships through doctoral fellowships, and then indeed after doctoral level training. That also brings me then to career development awards in the second column in the blue colored font. In NIH, our mechanisms begin with letters. R is for research grants. K is for career. I don't know what the C is for. We don't seem to use the C, but at least in the terms of sound, we have K for career development, starting from younger investigators, K01, and taking people all the way across their career life course. Would you go ahead, please, Jesse? Regardless of the kind of application, kind of mechanism to which you apply, you can see here our rock star of science, Dr. Francis Collins. I think I can't remember which designer sponsors that award every year. Your project has to have specific aims. You can see the rules, my hints for what makes for good specific aims. They are short. They convey the potential impact of your research on the knowledge base. And you want to use those specific aims as a touchstone throughout your application, or as I say, weave them throughout. Next, please. Okay, if indeed you are submitting a research project, you want your research strategy to speak to the 4 NIH review criteria. It's very nicely organized because your application will ask you to organize your thoughts that way. If you've conducted preliminary research, published or otherwise, you want that in the approach section. For social and behavioral scientists, including most if not all of you, one thing that we have found that we also have published in peer-reviewed journals is the fact that folks in these areas of research are much less likely than biomedical researchers to apply for renewals or revisions of research projects. Typically, the large-scale research projects are the R01s. That's where the big money is. You probably have heard talk about that. Maybe you work on them now. People in our disciplines are much less likely to file renewals. They are more likely to repackage the results from one R01 and use them as preliminary results in a new grant applications. They don't score as well as renewals and revisions, and so rather than use preliminary studies, Dr. Bill recommends progress reports because renewals get better scores than new applications. Go ahead, please. Environment. Reviewers are very concerned about the environment in which you conduct your research. This is particularly true for young investigators, whether you're doing a fellowship or career development award, or whether you're applying for a research project. I hate people who read slides to me, so I'm not doing that. I will point out that lots of people in our field think that because they're not conducting medical research or research in medical clinics, they don't have biohazard containment protections. They have no need for them. And indeed, if you're doing involving any of those kind of fluids, yeah, you do need to account for those things, or reviewers will ding you. ESI stands for Early Stage Investigators. That is an official designation that you can have in the first decade after your terminal degree and or postdoctoral training. It also applies if indeed you are new to the system. You want to explain how a constellation of, labs, colleagues, organizational structure supports you and poises you for success in this project and beyond. Moving on. Thanks, Jesse. Talking about you, investigators, I really need to emphasize here your personal statement. There are too many researchers out there, experienced or otherwise, who think that the personal statement in an NIH biosketch is boilerplate. One can copy and paste from one biosketch to another. This is farthest from the truth. The personal statement is an extra place in any given grant applications where you can talk about how you, combined with your proposed colleagues on this research, are a uniquely qualified and synergistic team poised for success if only, granted the funding. Next, please. I think we're up to the esteemed Dr. Mahomes.
Yep. Anything else you'd like to say, Bill, that might not have been covered in your slides?
Let's just save the time for questions, unless you think I've missed anything, Jesse.
Sure. Nope, that sounds great. So next up is our next panelist, Dr. Valerie Mahomes. And Dr. Mahomes received her PhD in psychology from Howard University and is currently the acting chief of the Pediatric Trauma and Critical Illness Branch at the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. She also manages the Child and Family Processes and the Child Maltreatment and Violence Research Program in the Child Development and Behavior Branch at NICHD. Prior to joining NICHD, she was a faculty member at the Yale School of Medicine in the Child Studies Center School Development Program. So thanks again for being with us, Dr. Mahomes, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, I am the chief of the branch and have been for now about 2 years, and I'll say a little bit about that as we go along. So I used to, prior to taking this post, I managed the social and affective development child and family process portfolio, and some of that has made its way into our new branch. But I just want to thank you all for joining. This is really so important to have early career scholars learning about this process because it's going to make a difference in your career. And our goal is to promote the development of early career scholars so that you can move from a dependent, mentored kind of phase of your career into independent researchers making significant contributions to the field. So one of the ways that we encourage you to do that right from the beginning is to look at the, next slide please, look at the mission of the various institutes for which your science may be related. It may not be evident just by the name of the institute that you have some scientific relevance to, that your project has scientific relevance to their priorities, but oftentimes it does. And so what we encourage you to do is to look at those, Dr. Elwood talked about the institutes and centers that make up the National Institutes of Health. What I would encourage you to do is to think about the NIH like a university, and that the schools and colleges of a university are kind of like the institutes of NIH. So we would be a school or a college that focuses on child health and human development. We have several dimensions with NICHD, and we have partners across the institutes that have relevant programs where we may have overlapping scientific interests, and we work quite well together. And you'll hear that when Dr. Crump speaks, and also Dr. Elwood talked about that somewhat implicitly in his kind of overarching statements. So look at the mission statement. It's very important to see what the Institute supports and what it doesn't support. Next slide. Our Institute at NICHD has a variety of branches. Some other institutes are organized differently, but if you think of our NICHD director like the dean of a college, and the branches like departments within a college or school, ours would be the pediatric and critical illness branch, and there are other branches here where there might be relevant interests. So talking to one person would open the door for you to have entree to program officers in the other branches or divisions within that particular institute, because we kind of know where our partners are both within our institute and across our institute. So it's important to kind of understand that it's just, you might be talking to me, but there may be other places where your project has relevance, and we will help guide you through that process. Next slide. So one of the things that we encourage you to do, so understand how NIH is structured, look at the mission statements of the institutes, get a sense of the programmatic and divisional breakdown of the institute so that you can kind of know where they would be a good home to your research. And then next, look at some of the funding opportunities that the institute provides. So for NICHD, on our landing page, I've got an arrow next to grants and funding so that you can see when you pull down that menu what some of the priorities are and some of the active grants are. And each institute has something complementary to this. On each of the institute's landing page, it tells you what some of the priorities are, what they're working on, and where some of the high priorities are. Next slide. So for NICHD, we have, Dr. Elwood talked about training and career development, the Ks. We have, each institute uses some of these mechanisms very differently. So we have a K01, which is the Mentored Scientist Career Development Award, but we only use it in 3 areas: child maltreatment, population dynamics, and medical rehab research. So you'd want to talk to us to find out if your areas of interest match. For those of you that are doing patient-oriented research, you've got a clinical degree and you want to continue to do that kind of clinical research, then the K23 might be a good mechanism for you. Or you might be interested in not so much patient-oriented research, but clinical research. A K08 might be appropriate for you. And while you may not be the person to apply for an institutional training grant, it would be really, really important for you to kind of scan the landscape of faculty members at your institution. When you go to SRA in Baltimore, you will see faculty members who have T32s, and they have slots for pre- and postdoctoral fellows, and would likely be taking applications, interviewing people to take those slots. So those are opportunities for you to get career development training. Next slide. One of the ways, another way that you can find out who's doing what and where you might be able to find partners, collaborators on your research. If you're interested in getting on a training grant in an area that's related to your science, just to look at the NIH Reporter. That's our database of funded programs. I believe, Dr. Elwood, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe since 1977. And it's a veritable treasure trove of the projects and the investigators, the congressional districts. You can search on key terms, which I've got highlighted there. You can search by institute. You can search by congressional district, or if you know a PI, you can find out what they do. Next slide. So once you do your search, you can check the institute. So let's say you've already figured out that NICHD would be the best home for your research. You can check the box and select your institutes of interest to find out what in those areas that the institute has funded that's related to your research. And this is important because, as Dr. Elwood talked about, your background and significance and all those review criteria, what's also important is the public health significance. And looking at the reporter gives you a good sense as to whether or not we've already made a significant investment in an area of research that you're interested in, and also where the gaps are in our funding trends in this particular area of research. So I love starting out with the reporter after you've kind of narrowed down where you think your interests lie. Next slide. So this is an example of what would come up if you had put in some key terms and you decided to focus on NICHD. This is just an example of what comes up. So you can see the project number, the title, the contact person, where they're from, the funding levels, and publications, and any other links and so forth that it will just really help you to figure out how to navigate through this process. Next slide. So once you've done your homework and figured out where there's a good home for your research, what gap your research would be filling, or where your training needs are and where there might be opportunities for you to find a home for your training, you might then contact the program officer, and as Dr. Elwood talked about, submitting a concept paper to get the conversation started. This is what I like to see on the concept papers that people send to me. This gives us a good sense of how to get started with our conversations, where we might be able to help guide you from your concept paper, just a one-pager. You don't have to send us the whole thing. This helps me to figure out whether I'm the best person, or maybe Dr. Crump is the best person, or Dr. Elwood, since he has a big picture of NIH, his work cuts across the entire agency. He might be able to point you in the direction of someone who would be best served to support your research. And often we share these concept papers when we get them to find out if other of our colleagues might be interested. Next slide. And so finally, I would say that once you've done your homework and once you've got your mission and you know where you're going and you've done all your due diligence, don't be shy. Contact us with your one-pager, and we'll be happy to help shepherd you through the process. And we'll take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mahone. So our final panelist is Dr. Aria Crump. Dr. Crump received her Doctor of Science in Behavioral Sciences from the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development, and she's also worked as an assistant professor in the Department of Public and Community Health at the University of Maryland. She's currently a health scientist administrator with the Prevention Research Branch of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So thanks again for being with us today, Dr. Crump.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining. I certainly hope that that this is very useful information for everyone who's a part of the call. And just keep in mind that those of us here who work for NIH are here to support the mission of the Institute, and a big part of that is working with extramural researchers and aspiring extramural researchers to advance our mission. So I wanted to start off just by mentioning that in my current position, as Jesse mentioned, I'm a health scientist administrator. My areas of interest within my my work are the prevention of drug abuse and related disorders in the transition to adulthood and in late adolescence. And I have a portfolio that also involves American Indian and Alaskan Native populations and prevention in that context, as well as a focus on prescription drug abuse prevention. I wanted to highlight what Dr. Mahomes has said, which I think is really key, and that is the importance of finding the right person or people around NIH who can help to support your interests and help to move you to the next step in as you seek funding. So you can advance the slide. What I want to talk about briefly is, first off, as you think about seeking funding, I suggest that you know the funder's priorities. And what I mean by that is that I suggest that you think about having a grant as having a short-term relationship of sorts with a funder. And what you want to match, just as you're matching, developing a partnership of any type, you want to match your idea, your program of research to the mission of the funder. And in order to be able to do that adequately, it's important to understand what those priorities are. You want to be well prepared for seeking grants. And what I'm thinking about with regard to preparedness is your training, for example, on a substantive and methodological level, your collaborators, I want to think of them as your circle of support, because naturally science in these days is a collaborative enterprise, and it's really key to know what your strengths are and where you will need support and guidance and expertise from others. I want to suggest that preparedness is also having a strong understanding of the field that you're working in and the major players in that field. I suggest that you think of yourself as a builder. You want to build on existing knowledge, but you also want to seek your inner innovator. You want to ensure that the proposal that you're developing both recognizes and builds on what is understood in the scientific community, but also fills an important gap and thus addresses innovation in science. The third thing is knowing the process. The funding process is very, I would like to say that once you get used to it, it's all very predictable, but there is a learning curve. And so some of the types of things you need to know about are, understanding the differences in what's a new investigator, what's an early career investigator, what's understanding electronic submission requirements, review cycles, the role of your institutional business official and how you work with an institutional business official, as well as thinking about how to go about selecting a funding opportunity. So there are lots of issues that, it's really just a matter of gaining an understanding, a basic understanding of these. And then once you get over that learning curve, it's all so much more predictable, so much more straightforward. So how do you get there? How do you find out priorities, be prepared, learn the process? I suggest that you make a major effort to connect with the resource people and also take advantage of web resources such as the NIH reporter that Dr. Mahomes has mentioned. Okay, next slide. So NIDA, I've mentioned that I'm at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and this is NIDA's front page to the website. Again, I'm echoing my colleagues' comments. You really want to learn about the different institutes and centers that may have a connection to your specific research area. You can click, so here's where you can find funding opportunities on NIDA's website. And naturally, every institute's going to have a place where you can learn about specific funding opportunities. You can click again. Here's a link for looking at research, training, and career development. So Dr. Mahomes talked about opportunities that are offered at NICHD. Most, if not all, the institutes and centers have their own specific set of research, training, and career development opportunities that they offer. We're not all necessarily offering the same one, so it's really important to, not only match your specific interest area in science, but also match the type of research you're seeking. So as an example, NIDA offers a dissertation research award, which may serve your purpose perfectly, but that award may not be offered at another institute. So you definitely have to pay attention to the interface between those two. And then click again. And then this link here on the web page, if you click on that, there's a link to the strategic plan. And this is key. A number of us have gone through, us meaning different institutes, have gone through a strategic planning process. And NIDA's draft strategic plan is online now. And I think one of the best ways understanding where the priorities are for an institute is understanding how they envision the work that they're doing in the next 5 years. And so I would recommend that you seek out both funding opportunities and strategic planning information for institutes to help you understand where your work might fit. And you can go ahead, advance the slides. Just to highlight some of NIDA's investments in adolescent research, some folks might not automatically think about drug abuse as adolescent researchers, but NIDA actually has put quite a bit of resources into efforts that address adolescents, and rightly so, as drug abuse is often starts during the course of adolescence, and even drug disorders often start in adolescence as well. I'm just highlighting a couple of efforts here that are underway. The Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study is a brand new longitudinal study that the Institute has launched. And this is really just to give you a sense of some of the efforts that have been going on and our investment and interest in adolescent research. And then you can go ahead and advance. So I talked a little bit about priorities already. That is, how do you figure out the connection between your work and the work of a particular institute? I want to also talk a little bit about preparedness. And one of the ways that I think about this as it relates to NIDA is, where does the expertise that you bring to the table fit in? So as I think about some of the most interesting, some of the most exciting opportunities in NIDA currently, I think about issues around neurobiology, social networks, gene-environment interplay, understanding comorbid conditions. Certainly the explosion, with new, what I'll call new challenges such as e-cigarettes, and old challenges such as health equity. And so I think about all of these types of areas that I have on this slide here. And what I wanted to encourage you to think about is, as you approach your work and your proposal to an institute, what are those particular skills that you both have and can develop in the course of preparing to apply? I think that's really important, and I think understanding what the opportunities are within an institute can help you think about what types of preparedness that you can bring to your application. And next. So I wanted to finally just talk very briefly about the funding process. One of the most frustrating things, I think, when you're first starting off is that it's not a quick and easy, it's definitely not quick and dirty, not quick and easy. Typically from the point of grant submission to the point of funding, in the best case scenario, is a 9-month process. And I think the key is that you have to be committed to a research career where you understand that everybody's in the same, a part of the same systems. We're working together, meaning colleagues investigating particular health conditions, and that a part of what our our goal is to develop our ideas, to make them as strong as we can, because the institutes want to invest in the best science. And a part of the process of developing those ideas and reviewing those ideas is that it can be time-consuming. But if you think of yourself as the researcher in the center of the diagram here, think about your ideas being further developed and enriched by interactions with program staff at the institutes, as well as by your collaborators and mentors, and by the literature in particular. And then you think about, as you follow the green arrows around, once you've developed that idea, you are submitting your application. After you identify a funding opportunity announcement that's appropriate for your idea. After submission, it will be sent to the Center for Scientific Review, or CSR, where an independent committee will be convened to review. A National Advisory Council will be responsible for taking a look at the results of that review and providing guidance to the institutes around funding. And then ultimately, the outcome is that program staff advise their leadership on funding. And you hope that there's a pot of gold at the end of that process, but you understand as well that there may be a need to revise and resubmit, and that typically halfway through that 9-month period, you would get a sense of, you might definitely need to resubmit and get that process back going again. And I think the thing that's really important to remember is that this is something that both junior emerging investigators as well as established investigators go through. It's not unusual to have to go through the resubmission process, and that in the end we are all incredibly hopeful that this process is leading to the absolute best science, both to the benefit of public health as well as to the benefit of everyone else involved. So next slide. So that's my name, my contact information, and I would be more than happy to assist with additional questions. I hope that your pursuits of science, please keep in mind that I hope that your pursuits of science are fruitful and that this is a process that requires perseverance, it requires ingenuity, requires dedication, and if you're able to bring that to bear, then you will be successful. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Crump. So now let's transition to our question and answer session, and we had quite a few questions submitted ahead of time, and I'm also seeing a few questions pop up on my screen here live, so this is really great. And so I can see where they can kind of clump in certain sections, and so we've received a few questions about how to maximize our bio sketches and our personal statements, which is something that I believe each of you touched on. So I'd like to ask a couple questions about that to get us started. The first question we have talks about how the new BioSketch form seems to be a lot more focused on publications and previous contribution to science than the previous BioSketch form. And do any of you have suggestions for how we can write an effective new BioSketch form if we're an early career investigator, so we might have fewer publications, or we just haven't had as much opportunity, really we just haven't been involved in the science, or we're early career scholars and we haven't had time to make those major contributions to science. So how can we maximize, even if we only have a few publications and have made some contributions but not major ones, how do we address that in our personal statements? And maybe that's a good question for Dr. Elwood to start talking about.
Gosh, that was, is that in the, where is that question? I need the beginning of it again.
Sorry, so I might be the only one who can see it, but the new BioSketch form seems to be really focused on publications and previous contribution to science rather than the form that was used previously. So for those of us who are maybe doctoral students or we're just getting started and so we have fewer publications, what do we do?
And I don't see this as problematic, because if you are it's only a problem. Not having a whole lot of publications is not a problem if you are applying for a fellowship or a young career development award, because you are a young career person. So if you have, and the number of publications is limited to 15 recent ones to help put researchers on a more even comparison basis. So if you're just graduating and you're applying for a new, a mentored research award, and you have 5 publications in really good journals, that would look really good. The fact that you were applying for a mentored doctoral level research award, a KO1, and your personal statement would put your accomplishments to date in context.
And this is Valerie. I wonder if I could weigh in on that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Dr. Elwood is absolutely correct. I love that last statement, putting your contributions in context. And one of our scientific review officers used to remind us that really your application is telling a story about who you are, and and what you bring to this research. So the new BioSketch is really an opportunity for you to do more than just chronicle, your career, where you've been and what you've done, but to say something about yourself that we wouldn't otherwise know, so that we would have that context for evaluating the science that you're putting forward, or for the particular role that you're going to play on an application. So I think this new BioSketch is really, as Dr. Elwood said, it's really more of an opportunity than a limitation, because it now values all the different ways in which you have been involved in research, and gives the reviewers much more to evaluate than what they typically had. So I always encourage people to use that section strategically, and not just to, as Dr. Elwood said earlier, to cut and paste and put down the pro forma information. Thank you.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Crump, about how we can address fewer publications on our BioSketches or make our BioSketch stand out from other applicants?
Yeah, I think those responses were, fully adequate. The one thing that I would just mention, or I would just reinforce, is that, the very beginning part of that, the personal statement of the first section of the BioSketch, really, or I should say section A of the BioSketch, really should be customized to the particular opportunity that you're applying for. I think that's the one thing where you can really, one place where you can personalize your experience in a regular R-type application.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next set of questions are about those of us who may not have gone straight from undergrad to graduate school and are now pursuing a research or faculty position. What tips might you have for people who are trying to return to research from teaching, or for applicants who they've kind of shifted, they've come to research as maybe a second career or just later in their career? What tips do you have for those applicants? And maybe that's a good question for Dr. Crump.
So that's a great question. I think it's important to realize that we all are coming from different places, and the NIH actually recognizes that with different types of opportunities, but those are often hidden. So for example, there are research supplements that can be sought to an existing grant for someone who's reentering the scientific workforce. That's something that you would want to talk to a program person about, whether their institute supports that or what they would need to do. But what that would involve would be partnering with someone who has ongoing research to put together an application to develop your program of research. That's one possibility. And naturally, it can. One thing that I would recommend strongly is really turning to networks from existing networks and continuing to build networks to stay engaged in science, to continue to build up a publication record, or to make sure that you're building your publication record in a particular area, because it does, I believe, put you at a bit of a disadvantage when your application is right next to, if you will, someone who has been the same number of years out of past the degree, but has been constantly building, growing, publishing, etc. So I think the networks are key. I think you may want to partner as a co-I on a R01, for example, as an investigator, I should say, on an R01 before you actually submit your own R01, to give yourself a chance to really develop your better. And certainly the NIH reporter, as well as colleagues, there are different ways that you can look to make those connections. But it really does take a lot of creativity, I believe.
Great. Dr. Mahomes or Dr. Elwood, would you like to add anything?
Well, I'll say that I had a whole other career before I got my PhD, and I was 2 when I started, so so I had plenty of time. But it's okay. One of the things I think that the BioSketch allows for explanation of that to the extent appropriate. But I think what Dr. Crump was saying is using the right kind of mechanism. So what you want to do with your major advisor or mentor or research collaborator, you want to chart out a path toward independence, if you will. So maybe your first step, as already mentioned, might not be to apply directly for a grant yourself, but to get a re-entry supplement off of someone else's grant. To look at where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then chart out the appropriate steps accordingly. Maybe you have been keeping up with your publications, but maybe the science has changed, and you now need to get more training in state of the science in your particular area. The statistical methodologies may have changed or may have advanced, and you now need more training in those areas. Whatever your skills needs are, if you've been out or if you haven't, had this kind of direct linkage from, one training experience right into your research experience. So I would just say try to map out a roadmap, and then, kind of follow that, and as was already said, build your connections and your partnerships along the way. And that helps you to lessen some of the kind of frustration and anxiety that you might feel if you don't kind of take that strategic approach. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Dr. Elwood, anything to add? All right, we'll move on to our next question. Are there funding opportunities for people who are working as research associates at a research center that's not within academia or not within a research university? Are those individuals at a particular disadvantage? And I think I'll bounce that to Dr. Mahomes.
I love that question because that's one of my goals, to help people understand that they are eligible to apply. Our goal is to get as many people in the pipeline doing really important research, trying to move toward discovery and addressing some of these compelling public health issues. And oftentimes, individuals in teaching institutions are well poised to do that. Or you might be in a hospital setting or another setting where you can collaborate with academic institutions to do research, a community-based setting. So there are a number of funding mechanisms. One of my favorite is the Academic Research Enhancement Award, R15 for short. And that is a funding mechanism for institutions that have not received a significant amount of NIH funding, and it's for 3 years, $300,000. But what I love about it is that it values the fact that you come from a teaching institution, and it allows you to incorporate your students into your research. And in fact, that's part of one of the review considerations, the ways in which you will engage your students. So that's one example, and there are other, I would say, institute-specific examples of ways in which you can engage in this research enterprise without having to compete in the traditional R-series playing field. Our institute has community-based participatory projects and other special initiatives targeting geographic regions or targeting certain types of institutions like minority-serving institutions to promote health equity and all those kinds of things. So you want to, again, look at the institute and their mission and be aware of the funding opportunities, because some of them exceed what you would normally find on the general funding pages with respect to the regular R series grant.
This is Bill. May I jump in?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Mahomes on the R15. I think it is an extraordinary mechanism. I would, for all kinds of reasons, two of which I'll add two more points. One is you don't have to be at just simply an institution that has received, that is underserved in terms of NIH funding. You could be at a department or a college at a larger school that has overall received a whole lot of funds, but perhaps your department or college has not. So, you might be at, the medical school at What's the Matter You may have a whole lot of money from NIH, but the sociology department at the same university may have none. And so the sociology department, where many of you burgeoning scholars might be housed, would qualify for an R15. So it's not just institution, it could be a department that has been underfunded. The great thing about an R15, and this reflects my time spent in the countryside, and a good R15 is like a good milking stool. It has 3 even legs. There is a research project, there are faculty members, and there are students. And the purpose of an R15 is to hold up, to edify, to grow both faculty and undergraduate students through a research project. They have to be even when they're, as Val said, but it's an absolutely marvelous mechanism. Back to you.
Great. Dr. Crump, anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We received actually quite a few questions from early career scholars, particularly doctoral students, who have a great idea, have been told that their research is right on target with a particular institute at NIH, but they're really having trouble finding faculty either in their department or faculty that they know who are qualified to be mentors on their applications. Do you have any tips or ideas for those of us who may have great ideas, but we're either in a department that doesn't have lots of funding, or our advisor that we work with hasn't had an NIH grant in quite a few years? What can we do in that kind of situation? Maybe that's a good one for Dr. Crump.
Sure, and I'd also like to hear my colleagues respond to that as well, because I think that is a very tricky situation. My thought, first of all, is that it really does help a lot to have a connection to someone or some folks who know the NIH system, and certainly it helps a lot to be working within an organization that has experience with NIH systems. But that said, it really does take, it's really more about the will, if you will. So if you're working within an organization that is dedicated to strengthening and to being able to take on NIH grants, all the information is available. It's really a matter of really taking care of administrative tasks, of making sure that everything's in place at the administrative level, at the level of the administration, and that really is important, because what you may not realize is that NIH grants are given to institutions. So you really do have to make sure your institution can accept that award. Then going on to the actual mentor or sponsor, or, you know, it actually, I would recommend very strongly that you consider who is doing work that is very closely aligned with the work that you're doing in a nearby institution. So you may find that, you know, there's an institution right across the way where, you know, they have the grant experience, as well as you know, a scientist who would be a good collaborator, and oftentimes there's willingness to work together. I've been very pleasantly surprised at the amount of collegiality that I see across institutions, and I think that having an interest, having a common interest, and if you're working with someone who recognizes your potential and your what you have to offer the field, oftentimes those partnerships can bloom and grow. And again, NIH Reporter is one way to identify people who may be, you know, good connections. And even in these days, that technology is becoming such a major part of how we do everything in our life. You know, even longer distance collaborations are very possible. And those can involve someone at your institution as well as someone away from your institution. You may find also that you can learn a lot from going to scientific meetings, and, you know, folks who you connect with at those meetings, whether they're at a similar level or more advanced as well in terms of their career, you may make connections that are invaluable for helping you get your work off the ground. So I hope that's helpful, and I'd, you know, love to hear if my colleagues have other thoughts about that.
This is Bill. I second everything Dr. Davis Crump had to say. I also would add, you know, you folks are for the most part young people, right? So you're tweeting and you're Pinteresting and Instagramming, and I certainly would hope you're not doing it with your avocations. You're doing it with your vocations as well. And so you likely are, and if not, you will be immediately following smart-funded people. And so they are a source of, and they have these accounts not simply to promote themselves, but for the most part, they are smart people, funded people of goodwill. And so you can send them an individual, a personalized tweet, and as the good book says, you know, ask and you shall receive advice. Moreover, in the original question, the poser asked, mentioned mentors who once had NIH funding and now lack it. They still likely have contacts. And so my next part speaks not just to this situation, but also, grantspersonship in general. To a great extent, research is a solitary process. You may run numbers alone, you may write alone, there's a lot of stuff you do alone. You meet with people, you work together with people, but there's a whole lot of solitariness in this solitude in this pursuit. The opposite is true when it comes to pursuing grant money, whether it's from NIH or anybody else. It takes an academic family, it takes an academic village. These are not simple. You don't contact simply your academic partners at your only institution. You break out into the village and ask people. And so your formerly funded mentor still likely knows program directors at NIH, and she or he can contact them, and they likely will be very happy to make connections for you. The people at other institutions who currently have money could do the same for you. And if you have a really great idea that's written up, some of my best friends who are program directors love, thank you for silencing your phone. They love to get written ideas. And so an NIH-based program director who gets a really cool idea from a young scholar who may not have a funded mentor but needs one might look into her or his portfolio of researchers and help you make that connection. Back to you.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think that's both of those comments are spot on.
So if I could add something, great responses, and this is a key question, and this is one of the things that SRA is all about. We're about mentoring. So if you go to SRA, or I should say when you go to SRA in Baltimore, and you're looking for a mentor, you're shopping around, go up and talk to people. Don't be shy, to use Dr. Mahomes' comment. Go ahead and talk to people. And what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out, so what? So give it a shot, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to find out how willing more senior colleagues are to talk with you. And it's not just because they're nice, it's because ultimately they got something to gain too. So think of it in that terms, and this is again what SRA is all about. And if you run into a really bad situation, I would love to hear about it. Of course, I'd like to hear about the good situations too.
That's true, and if the senior scholar is mean to you, you just tell him that you'll tell John on them. I'll fix them.
I love it. Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have time for one more quick question, which we have quite a few international scholars who are on this webinar with us today, and they're curious about whether NIH funds international scholars, and if they do, how they fund them.
Well, I'll start with that one. You have to look at the eligibility requirements for the particular funding opportunity announcement. If it's an RFA or a specialized program announcement, sometimes they will say that the projects may or may not have a foreign component, may or may not have, may only be for domestic researchers, so you'll want to pay attention to that. But for the most part, most institutes support research where there are opportunities to provide really compelling research to an important public health problem, or to build capacity in a low to middle income country by supporting scholars training in that area. Our Fogarty International Center is one place to start if you are an early career scholar and you are not a U.S. citizen and you're looking for training support, or maybe you're here studying and you plan to go back and do research in a country of interest. The Fogarty International Center is a good place to start because they have specialized funding mechanisms to help provide training and capacity building in a number of areas of interest, and quite often the various NIH institutes whose priorities overlap with Fogarty may also sign on to those initiatives and provide support where appropriate. I would also say that institutes have their own kind of global health initiatives, if you will, and they may have some specialized funding mechanisms to build capacity in certain areas or among scholars to go and do certain types of research in various countries. So that's important to kind of be aware of who those contacts are. And contacting a program officer can, again, help you navigate that. One of the things that is really kind of, I'm going to say just unknown, just for lack of a better term, is that sometimes we have funding research networks that are collaborations of teams of researchers that are working in and across various countries, and they're doing lots of studies within those networks, and those studies are kind of not competitive, but they're really great places to go and learn about how to do, in our case, clinical research on certain kinds of topics. We have a maternal and child health, global health network that's looking at maternal and child health research, and to be able to go in and to do a rotation or to shadow someone, to speak with investigators who are a part of those networks is really helpful. And sometimes if you talk to a program officer who's shepherding that process, they can help make those connections for you.
And hi, this is, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Crum.
Yes, and I wanted to talk a little bit about, to follow up on those comments, Fogarty is definitely a wonderful resource for those who are interested in international research. And I wanted to also second that that ICs have their own policies and programs around international research, and NIDA actually has an international research office and has specific announcements such as their international research collaboration on drug abuse and addiction research announcement. NIDA has also in the past participated in specific types of training opportunities like the Humphrey Fellows fellowships and the International Early Career Fellowship. So there are various opportunities that are out there. I did also want to mention that NIDA has a very strong interest specifically in HIV/AIDS research. About a third of our funding goes toward HIV/AIDS research, and as it relates to drug abuse. And a number of those projects are international projects. And so if there is if there's an interest in that particular area, that's something that one could take a look at. The final thing I wanted to mention is that one issue with NIH you have to keep in mind is that with our career development mechanisms, generally they are not available to international individuals except under specific circumstances. The one exception for that is our K-99 Career Development Award, and that's a transition to independence. It's called the Pathway to Independence Award, or PI Award. If you have other questions about any of that, please follow up with a program official.
Wonderful. Well, we are out of time, and I just wanted to say that I've learned tons from this webinar, and I'd like to really thank our fabulous panelists for taking the time to be with us today, for sharing their insight and wisdom. And thank you to all of our attendees for being with us today. I think this first webinar was a huge success. So thank you very much. And please remember to fill out the feedback survey because we want to know how it went for you as well. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you for inviting
me. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.